Hi everyone and welcome back to my channel. Today I'm going to be talking about my experiences of being an autistic mother, what it's like, what I struggle with, and what I'm good at. I am mother to a 2-year-old, so I have about 6 months experience of being an officially diagnosed autistic mother, and about 18 months of experience thinking, is motherhood driving me insane? Now a big disclaimer before we start. I know that parenthood is hard for everyone. I know that. I know that no one really finds it easy. But this video is more about exploring the ways that being autistic makes the experience different from the norm. If you're interested in learning more about autism and neurodiversity, please subscribe and hit that little bell icon and you'll receive a notification every time I post a new video, which is once a week. So obviously my experience has been a little bit different from others because I was diagnosed right in the middle of the baby/toddler years. And this has really been quite a lot to process on top of being a mother to a small child. But becoming a mother has really made me far more aware of my autistic traits, and so I do think it was a blessing in disguise. Things about me that had always been there were suddenly amplified. And I found myself in situations where before I would just push through my discomfort, and I suddenly found that I couldn't anymore. It was like motherhood was taking so much energy from me that all my coping mechanisms, especially masking and socializing, they all just seemed to fall away. And this wasn't just the sleep deprivation, or at least I don't think it was. Motherhood, and even more so when you're breastfeeding as well, is a sensory shock for many autistic people. When you are used to being able to control, for the most part, how much sensory input you get on a day-to-day basis, and a baby comes along who wants to be near you the entire time, who is feeding, is crying, is creating noxious smells, and puking and pooping. I'm not selling motherhood, am I? My son was actually an okay sleeper during the first year, and he didn't really cry that much either. But in the first few weeks when he had some colic, and for those couple of weeks he would cry for hours, you feel like your eardrums are going to explode. I've always had sensitive hearing, and obviously your coping strategy is to keep the house quiet. Now I know some people can't do that, maybe neighbours, or they live in a noisy city, but we moved out of London to get away from the noise of the city, and we were lucky that we didn't really have noisy neighbours. Having that sort of control before you have a child, and then transitioning to suddenly you don't have control because you have to be there for your child. You can't leave that child to cry. It made me really think, like, why am I so sensitive? Why can't I just suck it up? What's wrong with me? And that was when I first started using earplugs for dealing with a crying baby. But I didn't really think that was abnormal. And the sensory bombardment just gets more and more as your baby grows up. You know, once you start giving them solid food. We did baby-led weaning, which was great, but it's also really messy. So you're constantly wiping and cleaning and wiping again and washing your hands and trying to wash a baby's hands, which doesn't work very easily. And you're just bombarded with more and more sensory input, touching gross, disgusting things. And obviously, once they start eating real food, the poo gets way more objectionable than it has been. The sensory input from the kind of gross, yucky side of things, which sounds like I'm a 14-year-old, but it's very real. It was very real to me. And now that he's 2, it's getting better because he's quite a clean little boy for the most part. But he got to about 12 months old, and I thought, well, okay, if they start potty training in their 3rd year, as in between 2 and 3, I've got another year of nappies and wiping up poo. I do not use that word normally, but YouTube would like me to. So I actually looked into elimination communication after that point, because I just thought I cannot do nappies for the next 12 months at least. But you know, that actually worked in my favour because first of all, we were using cloth nappies, so the fewer nappies you use in total, the better for the environment. And now I have a 2-year-old who's pretty much potty trained. So that was a strategy that I used to try and control the sensory input. But I do think that that was kind of a good idea in hindsight. So, you know, maybe autistic people aren't all disordered. Maybe we have some good ideas sometimes. But elimination communication was great. The problem being that it does require a lot of attention, a lot of concentration, and a lot of mental energy and commitment. Through his first 2 years, I found myself almost hyper-focusing on his needs, which has obviously benefited him tremendously, but has left very little space for me to focus on my own needs. When I was diagnosed, the psychologist said that for many autistic women, their child and parenting in general becomes kind of a special interest, and I've definitely found this to be the case. And this is good and bad. It's good because it means that I have a lot of knowledge, but it's bad because every single decision that I make involves a lot of research. Maybe one day I'm reading journal articles on the emotional effects of early potty training. Spoiler, they're all funded by the nappy companies. When you're spending your evenings reading research articles, you're not spending your evenings winding down or, pampering yourself or watching TV. But it's like every single decision has to be the right one and the most accurate one. And life isn't really like that. I mean, this extends to, researching the effects of screen time, whether it's really as bad as they say, because a lot of the evidence is kind of like dodgy on that one. Researching the best toys, the best educational toys, different types of toys, that sort of thing, making sure that he has absolutely the right stuff that he needs. Saying it out loud is kind of like, I feel a little bit like, yeah, I can see now how other people might look at me like I'm overdoing this a bit. But that's just how my brain focused on this. My brain realized this is a very important thing that you have brought into this world, and so we have to do this right. We, like me and my brain, together we're doing this right. So this is good, obviously, because I find a lot of things. I found a lot of cool toys and do things in a very unique way, or certainly a different way from a lot of my neurotypical peers. For the first time in my life, I might say that focusing so intensely on sort of science-based or research stuff to do with parenting hasn't actually benefited me that much. Firstly, because the quality of research is poor, so you're spending your time wading through articles that are kind of bunk science in the first place, and you don't necessarily find the solutions that you need. Secondly, a lot of the research doesn't necessarily include neurodiverse kids and adults, so the question of, does this actually work for me and my family, is something that you really need to think about. But I think the worst part of hyper-focusing in this way is that it leads you down the path of thinking why all the time. Why is he crying? Why won't he sleep? Why does he have a funny tummy today? And for all these questions, there may be a truth in the universe to them, but the answer may not actually help you. The answer as to why he's not sleeping. Well, he's going through a developmental leap. Okay, so what do we do with that information now? And this is kind of dissatisfying because knowing the answer to these questions isn't going to make the present any more bearable when you're sleep deprived, for example. So it's taken me kind of a long time to realize that all this sort of problem solving on an intellectual basis isn't going to help me, because the question I need to be asking is actually, what can I do to make this easier for us all right now? Another thing that's been kind of hard on me over the last 2 years has been the socializing aspect. And they say it takes a village to raise a child, right? But no one has villages anymore. I don't have family in the country. And modern life is more isolated and more commodified than ever before. So I knew when I was pregnant and shortly after birth that I needed to find a support network. Other mums that I could offload and share the burden. But as I mentioned before, the exhaustion and sensory overload kind of exacerbated my autistic traits. Suddenly I felt awkward and shy and didn't know what to say. It was like all the coping mechanisms that I'd built up over the last decade, to make myself an adult, they were sort of stripped away, and suddenly I found myself feeling like this sort of gawky 13-year-old again. A sort of perpetually exhausted gawky 13-year-old. And when I tried to mask as I'd been accustomed to, I found myself burnt out for the rest of the day. So it just wasn't worth it anymore. And meeting up for coffee with other mums is a great way to pass the time when you've got a little baby, the days are long and you're stuck in the house a lot. But social chit-chat isn't something that's going to help me develop really deep friendships. And in these situations where you all kind of bring your baby and sit there and drink coffee, your attention's constantly being pulled away from the conversation. Whether it's your attention being pulled away by your own child or someone else's attention, you're talking to them and all of a sudden they're looking away. I mean, that might be how it feels to people talking to autistic people. But if they're not engaging in the conversation and it's disjointed and everything, for me, it's hard to keep up with that flow of conversation and think, what do I say? If they've had to sort something out for a long time, do I just go back to exactly what they were saying, or do we talk about something new? So that really those situations make it really hard for me to follow and sort of get back on track. I know now that group settings are the hardest for me. I'm much better talking one-on-one to people. And so the mum friendships that I've made have typically been when I've got to know people a little bit, and then I say, hey, do you want to meet up not in a large group of people. Do you want to meet up? And we can talk one-on-one. And I mean, you kind of go through phases. Having a newborn baby is sort of easy because they sleep and you're just there. And then there's sort of a difficult phase. But once they're a toddler, you can take them to places. They can play in a playground and you can sit there and drink your coffee. So yeah, the social aspect sort of gets easier or harder depending on how old your child is. And I know that this is maybe even the easiest phase of their life, sort of too, in terms of your social obligations as a parent. Because once they get to 4 or 5 and start going to school, you have to deal with school and more admin at other parents, other people's kids birthday parties. Which is why I'm really relieved that I got my diagnosis so early on in parenthood, because I can now work out my triggers and develop strategies as a parent, not as a masking 20-something, and be prepared before my son enters that phase of life. So overall, the main way that being an autistic parent differs from being a neurotypical parent is that you are just way more exhausted and way more overwhelmed by the same set of stimuli. And when all this gets heaped on our shoulders, we are prone to something called autistic burnout, which I think I'll be doing a video on sometime soon, so keep your eye out for that one. The concept of burnout is familiar to most people, so autistic burnout should be pretty self-explanatory. It is burnout that autistic people get. But for me, it kind of mimics the symptoms of fatigue and depression. But as with everything, including other various mental health conditions, awareness is really the key. Noticing the signs that you're overwhelmed and taking measures to avoid autistic burnout. When you know that you'll have multiple triggers in a situation, whether it's a play date, there's lots of children, there's lots of noise, you have to talk to other parents. Maybe you haven't slept well either. This situation makes me feel like I can't function as a human being anymore. And typically I'm used to just keeping it together, and after years of being unaware I have autism, I just have to keep going, right? But what I really need to teach myself is that I don't have to do the things that the other mums do. I don't have to take him to indoor soft play if I don't want to. I know some kids find it fun, but a lot of kids also find it really overwhelming and loud, so I don't have to do that. I can take breaks, I can do things differently, and it doesn't make me selfish that I need more time to recharge than other parents might do. I love my son with all my heart, and I love being a parent and watching him grow and develop, but it's definitely added a lot to my already quite full plate. I do believe autistic people can make great parents, even if we need more help and support than others. But I think that we're not supposed to be doing it alone. The goal shouldn't be complete independence. As if depending on others is a bad thing. That's a very sort of hyper-capitalist view of the world. We are human beings. We are supposed to be connected. We're supposed to be involved in communities. And parenthood is not something that is supposed to be done by a nuclear family or even a single parent. It's too much, and it's too much for me at times. But what we should be striving to do is creating communities that are neurodiverse friendly, creating more opportunities for autistic parents to reach out to others, to develop friendships, to just get away from it all, and to spend time with like-minded people. That was very earnest. Let me know if this resonated with you in the comments below. And check out my other playlists on autism and neurodiversity by clicking here, 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 here. Click everywhere, stay on my channel, keep watching, and I will see you next week.